Welcome to this explainer. Ever wonder if everyday objects actually have rights? Let's dive into that mind-bending idea.
Seriously, imagine a cosmic rule where absolutely everything, not just us humans, has a fundamental right.
Take water. Its natural right is to quench thirst. If you don't use it right, you violate it.
Trace a light bulb's glow back through the grid, dams, and rain. It literally points straight to the creator. Honoring that ultimate right means we gotta ask why. We need genuine curiosity to truly understand the creator.
That brings us to ilm. True knowledge isn't just absorbing random facts. It's the critical act of distinguishing. Think about it. If you try hearing every sound at once, you hear nothing. Intellect totally requires focus.
Now, we're facing a huge crisis today. We've got knowledgeable people lacking faith, and faithful people lacking knowledge.
Splitting science from faith is a total disaster. It literally fractures our society and halts all human progress.
So how do we fix this? Enter the 4B framework. Inform, build consciousness, unite, and finally, integrate. Step 1, inform. You see, without the right baseline information, taking correct action is basically impossible.
Step 2, consciousness. Raw data without real awareness, it's just like a frozen flower that never bears fruit.
And here's the kicker. True consciousness doesn't make you arrogant. It actually builds profound humility.
Step 3, unite. True knowledge is always meant to bridge humanity and ideas, never to divide us.
We absolutely must reject false divisions. The best scholars seamlessly combine biology, astronomy, and deep theology.
Finally, step 4, integrate. Every piece of valid knowledge, from physics to scripture, points to one ultimate truth.
Perspective is everything. Praising the sun makes it an idol, but praising its creator, that's profound wisdom.
The entire universe is basically a grand text, and scientific facts are just footnotes pointing to its author.
So I'll leave you with this. Is your knowledge property breeding arrogance or a trust bringing humility?
Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're diving headfirst into a really profound philosophical framework. It's one that connects our simplest, everyday observations of the physical world with a much, much higher, integrated purpose. I mean, we're all out here trying to make sense of our surroundings, right? But today's source material argues that knowledge isn't just a giant pile of data, it's actually a monumental bridge connecting nature, the mind, and the divine. We are going to explore the concept of ilm, not just as a vocabulary word, but as a completely comprehensive way to read the universe, and really to read ourselves. So let's start this fascinating mental journey.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with giving due rights, move into the ultimate right, then hit true information, achieving awareness, unifying knowledge, and finally, we'll wrap up with the holistic mind. Let's jump right in. All right, Section 1, Giving Due Rights. This is all about finding the underlying purpose in absolutely everything. So let's start with a foundational concept from our source text, giving things their due right. Now, obviously, this applies to our basic senses, like our ears having the right to hear. But it also applies to the mundane, everyday objects around us. Think about a simple light bulb. Fulfilling its due right actually connects you to this massive, invisible network. When you turn on that light, you're connecting the bulb to the house's wiring, the wiring to the city's electrical grid, the grid to those huge high-tension wires crossing mountains, and those wires right back to the dams. And it doesn't stop there. The dams rely on water from the mountains, which comes from the rain, which comes from the clouds, which ultimately leads us all the way back to the creator of it all. So fulfilling the right of just one simple thing intricately ties you to the entire universe. It's like a giant puzzle.
And tracing that massive chain backward naturally brings us to Section 2, the ultimate right, where we look for the ultimate source.
By zooming out like that, we realize the greatest, right at the very origin of this immense chain, belongs to the creator. But how do we actually fulfill that ultimate right? Well, by striving to understand. It just doesn't happen without deep, intentional comprehension. And the intellect's very first tool for unlocking this kind of understanding is asking the absolute most fundamental question we have: why? Because if we don't ask why, we can never reach the wisdom behind the mechanism. To actually reach that level of profound understanding, our source material introduces a brilliant 4-step mental model known as the 4 Bs: inform, make conscious, unite, and integrate. Basically, every single moment of our journey in learning and making sense of the world needs to pass through this exact 4-stage filter. So, let's break these down.
Moving right along to Section 3, True Information. This is the root of all our actions.
Step 1 is to be accurately informed. Because, let's be honest, any human action built on a foundation of incorrect information is ultimately going to be flawed. Action is the fruit of knowledge, not the root. But what exactly is this knowledge, or ilm? Well, the classical linguist Ibn Faddus defines it not just as raw data storage, but as tamyiz. That is an active cognitive process of distinguishing truth from falsehood. It's a classifying process. Think of it like this. Just like your eye has to blur out the background to focus on a single object, or how your ear has to isolate one specific voice in a crowded room, true knowledge is the active cognitive act of isolating the truth.
Now, here is the absolute crucial point. Knowledge is not the final destination. In this view, it is essentially a brilliant footnote placed beneath a much greater truth. Think about it like a finger pointing at the moon. We really should be looking at the moon, not just staring endlessly at the finger. Scientific knowledge, the physics of objects around us, none of these are the final stop. They're simply magnificent footnotes pointing back to a divine reality.
Let's make this footnote idea super concrete. Consider looking at the sun. If you marvel only at its physics, its precise orbit and massive scale, and you just say, "You are magnificent," well, you independently create a false idol. You're stopping at the raw data. But marveling at its perfect distance, the fact that it neither freezes us nor burns us, and saying how beautifully you were created, well, that connects that physical data directly back to its divine origin. That is true knowledge. It doesn't sever the tie. It actually reinforces the connection to the owner.
So, once we've gathered all this correct information, it naturally has to evolve. That brings us to Section 4, Achieving Consciousness, moving way beyond just raw data.
Because if knowledge fails to cultivate deep consciousness, it remains mere data, and that is a truly tragic situation. It's literally like a tree whose gorgeous blossoms freeze and die before they ever get the chance to become fruit. I mean, without the fruit, what good were the blossoms in the first place? Without consciousness, what good is that massive database of facts you've just built up in your head?
You can actually test this on yourself right now. True knowledge reveals our immense limitations. The more you truly know, the more you realize how incredibly little you actually know. And that breeds profound humility. But raw, stagnant data that hasn't evolved into consciousness? That just fuels human arrogance. It makes a person entirely full of themselves. And where does that arrogance even come from? Well, it stems entirely from treating knowledge like it's our own personal property, a possession we can just hoard. True knowledge, however, is a sacred trust. It's an emanate, a profound responsibility that we are ultimately accountable for returning to its owner with absolute honor. Someone who holds a sacred trust can't just sit still. They act with real purpose, knowing they are responsible for what they've been given.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, Unifying Knowledge. It's time to bridge that gap.
Our source material highlights a massive crisis in the modern world right now, an incredibly dangerous and destructive split. On one side, we have the highly knowledgeable but spiritually disconnected. On the exact opposite side, we have the devoutly religious but completely ignorant. This fatal separation between intellect and faith is exactly what leaves society drifting aimlessly without an anchor. So how do we fix this? We have to completely tear down these artificial walls we've built between the sciences. When Scripture mentions signs, it doesn't just mean the written word on a page. Studying zoology is the active reading of animal signs. Exploring astronomy is reading the cosmic signs. Studying textual scripture is reading textual signs. They are all pieces of the exact same puzzle, and separating them is a massive mental fracture.
To embrace all these signs together requires what is beautifully called the holistic mind. Let's look at Section 6, the holistic mind, and how we embrace this unity.
If we look back through history, we see this holistic mind modeled absolutely perfectly by the great polymaths. Brilliant thinkers like Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, and Al-Farabi simply didn't separate physical science from theology. They acted as integrated masters of medicine, philosophy, and religion all at the exact same time. One person could author a massive treatise on musical notation, invent an instrument, and simultaneously be a master of jurisprudence. Why? Because they entirely refused to compartmentalize the knowledge reflecting off the divine mystery.
On the flip side, using knowledge to artificially divide these realms, severing the mind from the heart or matter from meaning, that is described as the ultimate form of corruption. It's a destructive separation. Any approach that traps you solely in the material world or solely in the spiritual world while bypassing your intellect entirely is severing a tie that was always meant to be whole. If knowledge is used merely to divide, it completely loses its value. After all,
A standard computer hard drive holds way more raw data than a human ever could. So as we reflect on this profound four-step framework of informing, raising awareness, uniting, and integrating, we've got to look inward. Ask yourself this really critical question. Are you using your knowledge to sever ties, or are you using it to holistically integrate your mind, your heart, and the universe around you? Keep seeking the truth. Keep looking at the moon instead of the finger, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
I want you to try something for a second. If you're not driving or anything, just take a look around the room you're in right now and pick a single, totally ordinary object.
Right, like maybe a coffee cup sitting on your desk.
Yeah, or the screen you're looking at, or, well, let's say it's a light bulb in the ceiling. Just focus on it for a moment.
Notice the glass, maybe the filament if it's an older one.
Exactly. Notice the light casting shadows across your walls. Now, if I were to ask you, what does it mean to give that specific light bulb its right?
You might think we've completely lost the plot.
I mean, I would. A light bulb doesn't have rights. It's just glass and wire and inert gas. It's a manufactured good.
Just an object.
Right. But what if looking at that bulb, and I mean truly deeply looking at its existence, what if that was the first step in this massive, invisible chain that connects you directly to the entire cosmos?
It is a pretty wild premise to start with.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. Today's deep dive is built on a translated transcript from a deeply philosophical lecture by Mustafa İslamoğlu.
And we have some fascinating source material today.
We really do. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore a framework where science, philosophy, and spirituality aren't, these warring factions.
Right, which is how we usually see them.
Yeah, we are so used to seeing them in competition, fighting for dominance in our culture. But instead, this source presents them as essential, overlapping layers of the exact same truth.
It requires a profound shift in perspective to even begin this journey. I mean, if we could actually visualize the mental space we are entering today, I want you to imagine sitting somewhere between, think of a dimly lit ancient grand library.
Oh, like the kind filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves of dusty manuscripts.
Exactly, hand-bound manuscripts.
Yeah.
But cross that image with a modern astronomical observatory.
Like with a massive telescope pointed at the stars.
Right, pointed at the furthest, coldest edges of the galaxy. We have to merge those two atmospheres because the framework we are exploring today fundamentally challenges how we categorize the information we consume every single day.
It really blurs the lines.
It completely asks us to stop dividing the universe into empirical science on one side and abstract spirituality on the other.
Yeah, and interestingly, the speaker doesn't begin with some dry academic definition or a scientific formula.
No, not at all.
He begins with the concept of gratitude. But, it frames gratitude in a way that is highly active. It focuses on the sheer biological and spiritual capacity to learn.
Which is something we totally take for granted.
I noticed that immediately in the text. Before the speaker even dives into the mechanics of what knowledge is, there's this prayer of gratitude simply for the ability to acquire it. And the text points out that learning isn't just this passive event that washes over you while you scroll on your phone.
Right, it's not osmosis.
No, it requires a highly specific set of conditions to be met. It requires a willing heart, first and foremost. Then, it literally mentions the physical feat to carry you to the place of learning, and a mind willing to engage in deep reflection.
And the terminology used in the original language carries a ton of weight here.
Oh, like the specific words he uses.
Yeah, words like tefekkür and tedbiryay are utilized in the source, and these signify this relentless, penetrating kind of mental activity.
Like active processing, not just hearing.
Exactly. You cannot be a passive vessel and claim to be learning. Real learning demands that you engage the machinery you've been given. Which brings us back to this concept of hack, or rights, that you mentioned with the light bulb earlier.
Right, the rights of the object.
The source makes this overarching argument that absolutely everything in existence has a right. So the right of water, according to this framework, is to be drunk and to sustain life.
The right of bread is to be eaten.
Yes. And it scales all the way up to human biology.
Yeah, the text says the right of the mind is to think, and the right of the ear is to listen.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, giving a sensory organ its right is a radical idea. I mean, think about the ear.
It's an incredibly complex organ.
It is, and the source goes into almost anatomical detail here. It references the anvil, the hammer, the microscopic fluid inside the inner ear.
Oh, wow, so it gets really biological.
Highly biological. The argument being made is that this incredibly complex, highly sensitive biological system was constructed with a specific teleological purpose.
Meaning a built-in purpose or goal?
Right. And that purpose is to perceive truth, to decode the reality of the universe.
Okay, so it's not just to hear random sound.
No. If a person uses that magnificent biological machinery merely to consume background noise or, idle gossip,
They are basically wasting the equipment.
the speaker argues they are quite literally denying that biological system its inherent existential right. They are defaulting on the cosmic loan, basically.
I see the logic there, but it feels heavy. You are basically saying that by just passively hearing things or listening to trashy TV, I am committing an injustice against my own eardrum.
I get why it feels heavy, but it's less about guilt and more about awakening.
How do you mean?
Well, the framework is trying to shock the listener out of autopilot. We walk around with these supercomputers in our skulls and these hyper-advanced sensory arrays, and we use them to do the equivalent of, playing solitaire.
That is a great way to put it.
Fulfilling the right of the ear means intentionally filtering the noise to find the signal.
Which brings us back to that light bulb from the beginning.
Yes, the supply chain.
Yeah, the speaker traces the rights behind a single glowing bulb, and tracing this chain is what really pulled me into the material initially.
It's a fantastic thought experiment.
It is. He says, all right, you walk into a room, you flip a switch, and you are illuminated. You have given the light its immediate right by using it for its intended purpose.
Right, you needed light, you used it.
But then he traces the sequence backward. The bulb doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It is screwed into a socket. The socket contains wiring.
The wiring snakes through the walls, through the insulation.
Exactly, and connects to the home's electrical grid. And I thought he might stop there, but the expansion of the lens here is vital.
The speaker definitely does not stop at the architecture of the house.
Not at all. It rapidly expands outward. He points out the engineers who drafted the electrical plans for the entire neighborhood. He mentions the electricians who risked getting shocked to install it.
The apprentices who carried the tools.
Yes. The physical labor of the factory workers who melted the copper and manufactured the cables. Then the chain moves outside the house to the transformers on the street.
And the people who built those transformers.
Right. And then to the high-tension lines crossing mountains and valleys. He specifically notes the immense sweat and physical effort required to string those lines across hostile terrain.
It's staggering when you really map it out.
And he keeps going. Those lines lead all the way back to the hydroelectric dams, which then leads to the architects of the dams. The heavy machinery, the turbines, the water flowing into the dam, the mountains that directed the water.
The clouds that rained on the mountains.
Yes, and ultimately, according to the source, all the way up to the creator of the clouds.
Consider how this reframes a perfectly mundane moment. In our modern, highly industrialized world, we flip a switch and we just demand light.
Yeah, we feel entirely entitled to it.
We do. We are completely disconnected from the staggering sequence of geological events, raw materials, and human lives required to produce that simple illumination in our living room.
We just pay our power bill and don't think about it.
Right. By tracking this chain, the speaker is illustrating what it actually means to give reality its due. It transforms a person from being a blind consumer of their environment into an active, conscious participant.
I was reading that section and thinking it sounds exactly like a modern corporate supply chain analysis.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, but instead of a company tracking logistics, shipping containers, and profit margins to maximize revenue, it's a supply chain of pure existential interconnectedness.
The currency isn't money.
Exactly. The currency is absolute gratitude.
That is a highly effective way to conceptualize it. A corporate supply chain looks at the flow of materials to understand cost. This philosophical supply chain looks at the flow of reality to understand value.
Right, value beyond just a price tag.
You aren't just looking at a bulb. You are looking at the culmination of human labor, meteorological cycles, and divine engineering. Giving that bulb its right means holding all of that in your mind simultaneously.
But doing that for every object would be completely paralyzing.
Oh, sure.
You'd look at a wooden table and suddenly you're locked in a trance thinking about the soil composition, the nitrogen cycle, the rain, the carpenter, the steel in the saw blade, the miner who dug the iron ore for the saw blade.
You'd be staring at the table for 3 hours.
Yeah, you would never get anything done.
The goal isn't to walk around in a constant state of analytical paralysis. The goal is to cultivate a baseline awareness that shatters the illusion of independence.
The illusion that we are just self-sustaining islands.
Right. We tend to think we exist in a vacuum, completely self-sufficient. This exercise proves that our very existence, our very ability to see in a dark room, relies on millions of intersecting variables, and the source takes it to its logical conclusion. Beyond the rights of all these intermediaries, the parents, the teachers, the dam engineers, the neighbors, the ultimate overriding right belongs to the absolute infinite creator of the entire system.
Because without that source...
Because without the initial spark, none of the subsequent chain exists. It all falls apart.
This introduces a concept the text spends a lot of time on. It's this idea of human servitude, or überdienst.
Yes, that is a core pillar of the lecture.
Now, when a modern audience hears the word servitude, alarm bells immediately go off.
Naturally.
We associate it with oppression, a lack of freedom, and just blind obedience to authority.
And the text anticipates that exact modern friction. It is incredibly careful to define what this specific type of servitude actually entails.
It's not what you'd think.
No, it is the absolute antithesis of blind obedience.
Yeah.
The source argues that you cannot fulfill the right of a creator, you cannot truly follow a philosophy or adhere to prohibitions if you do not comprehend them.
So you can't just be a robot.
Exactly. Blindly following a rule you don't understand is portrayed not as piety, but as an intellectual failure.
The text basically says you cannot submit to a message without first decoding it. Therefore, the very first, most fundamental requirement of the human intellect before it does anything else is to ask a specific question.
The foundational question of why.
Right. The text uses terms like Nissen or violate, referring to the cause, the underlying reason.
Yes.
The speaker makes a definitive claim here. Without asking why, without searching for the cause behind a phenomenon or a rule, a person can never reach wisdom.
And that wisdom is called hikmet.
Exactly. Life itself is framed as a massive school, and learning isn't framed as a hobby for intellectuals.
Yeah.
It is the human being's fundamental right to education.
It's a biological and spiritual necessity.
But I want to inject some realism here, just playing the proxy for the listener.
Okay, go for it.
Is it actually possible to grasp the why behind everything in our current era? I mean, we live in an environment overflowing with endless data.
A literal flood of it.
We carry the sum total of human knowledge in our pockets, and honestly, most of the time it just feels like a fire hose of sheer noise. Social media, news alerts, emails, endless conflicting opinions.
It is incredibly overwhelming.
How does a person navigate that chaos to find the actual why?
That sense of being overwhelmed is precisely why this framework is necessary. The text draws a massive, impenetrable wall between the act of simply absorbing facts and the actual search for hikmet, or wisdom.
So they are two totally different things.
Completely different. The philosophy we are analyzing posits that simply collecting data like memorizing headlines, scrolling through feeds, hoarding trivia, does not fulfill the mind's right.
It just clutters it up.
It just clutters the machinery. Asking why is the filtration system. It is the mechanism that elevates us from simply existing in a sea of data to actually living.
So asking why acts like a sieve. It lets the useless noise fall through and catches the actual substance.
Consider the psychological difference. When you passively read a fact online, you are just logging a data point into your short-term memory.
Right, if you even remember it 5 minutes later.
Exactly. But when you stop and ask, well, why did this happen? Or why does this actually matter? You are actively seeking its purpose.
You are connecting it to the chain.
You are looking for where it fits into that massive cosmic supply chain we discussed earlier. You shift from asking, what is this, to what does this mean?
And to structure this search for meaning, the source introduces a very specific 4-part educational framework. The speaker categorizes them as the 4 Bs.
Based on the Turkish verbs for these actions.
Yeah, and I want to spend some time here because this is where the philosophy provides a really practical roadmap.
The first of these stages is Bilgelinder, which translates to inform, or the acquisition of knowledge. The text frequently refers to this foundational knowledge as EH17.
The argument begins with a deeply practical premise. Wrong knowledge guarantees wrong action.
Right, garbage in, garbage out.
You cannot build a stable structure on a foundation of bad math. The source uses a botanical metaphor, which I thought was really vivid.
Oh, with the roots and the fruit.
Yeah, it states that action is the fruit of knowledge, not the root. The root is the information you possess.
And if the root is poisoned with falsehood, or even just inaccuracies, the tree might still grow. It might still produce leaves of activity. But the fruit it ultimately bears will inevitably be spoiled.
Because the foundation was wrong.
Therefore, Acquiring knowledge is absolutely essential, but the text adds a non-negotiable qualifier. The knowledge must be sahih.
Meaning authentic, verified, and perfectly aligned with truth.
Yes.
Because if you don't actually know what you're doing, you might be acting with the best intentions in the world, but you are executing it wrong or applying it to the wrong situation.
Intention isn't enough on its own.
Right. But what really stopped me in my tracks was how the text chooses to define the mechanics of knowledge.
It's a very specific definition.
It doesn't define knowledge as just knowing a lot of things. It quotes a historical linguist and scholar, Ibn Faris, who defines knowledge fundamentally as the act of separating and distinguishing.
The specific term used there is tamizes.
Right, tamiz. Knowledge is essentially the cognitive ability to separate the false from the true, the signal from the noise.
And the speaker links this philosophical definition directly to the physical mechanics of human perception. I mean, think about the physical anatomy of focus. To actually see a specific object in your room, the human eye must aggressively limit its field of vision.
It has to block things out.
The text notes that if a person's optic nerve tried to process absolutely everything in their peripheral vision with the exact same intense clarity all at once, they would be blinded by the input.
It would just be a whiteout.
They would end up seeing nothing. The eye must localize. It must select a specific point in space to focus on while intentionally ignoring the rest.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because reading that made me immediately think of how a camera lens operates.
Oh, that's a perfect parallel.
If you are a photographer and you want to take a really crisp, emotionally resonant portrait of a person's face, you don't keep the entire bustling city street behind them in sharp focus.
No, you'd lose the subject completely.
Right. You adjust the aperture. You use a lens that intentionally blurs out the background. The background is still physically there. The data of the street hasn't disappeared. But by limiting your focus, by intentionally choosing not to look at everything, the subject you care about becomes crystal clear.
And the source points out that the ear works the exact same way.
Yeah.
If you are standing in a crowded room with 50 different conversations happening, and you try to dedicate equal mental bandwidth to all 50 simultaneously, it just sounds like a wall of static noise.
You wouldn't understand a single word.
You have to select one voice, isolate its frequency, and focus on it to actually listen to the words.
So the camera lens analogy works for both hearing and seeing.
It perfectly captures the mechanism the speaker is describing. And the text draws a very sharp, deliberate contrast here between human perception and divine perception.
How so?
It argues that only a limitless creator is capable of perceiving everything simultaneously without needing to restrict focus, without relying on physical organs or the bounce of photons.
Because God isn't limited by biology.
Exactly. But for humans, because we are inherently finite beings, limitation and focus are our primary indispensable tools for acquiring any knowledge at all. If we do not separate, if we do not blur the background, we cannot know the subject.
We have to close some doors to walk through one.
Beautifully said.
And that mechanism of focus ties directly into the linguistic roots of the word for wisdom, hikmet. The speaker points out that in classical Arabic lexicons, the root of this word is historically linked to a very physical action.
Yes, the action of tying an animal.
Tying a physical knot so the animal doesn't wander off into the desert and disappear. I love the visceral nature of that imagery.
It's very grounded.
Metaphorically, we live in a world full of endless, wandering alternatives, distractions, and half-truths. You only actually possess an idea, you only truly have knowledge when you successfully tie your heart and your mind to a single point of truth.
You have to tether it down.
Otherwise, your thoughts are just loose livestock running around in your head, generating chaos rather than sustenance.
That tethering of truth is what allows a person to move to the next phase. Once you have acquired this authentic knowledge, this ilimum, and you have separated the signal from the noise, how are you supposed to interact with that knowledge?
Right. What do you do with it?
The source offers a potent classic metaphor here to guide the listener. It suggests that human knowledge, science, and data are merely a finger pointing at the moon.
Okay, pointing at the moon.
The entire utilitarian purpose of the finger is to direct your gaze upward to the moon itself.
Right.
But if you become obsessed with the finger, if you stare at it, measure it, praise its shape, and forget to look where it is pointing, you have entirely missed the point of the exercise.
You're just staring at your own hand.
Exactly. Science and accumulated data are described in the source as a reference footnote to the reality of the creator.
A footnote. That is such a bold, striking way to position human achievement.
It humbles it immediately.
You are reading the grand text of reality, exploring physics and biology. And all of that science is just the little asterisk at the bottom of the page that says, hey, by the way, look at who wrote this.
That's exactly the framework.
The source dives really deep into astronomy to illustrate this point. And I have to say, finding hardcore astronomical physics inside a lecture on theology was totally unexpected.
It's brilliant how he weaves it in, though.
It is. The speaker talks about looking at the sun. Now, if you look at the sun and you just praise the giant ball of plasma for being so magnificent, you are essentially turning it into an idol.
The text actually references the ancient Mesopotamian sun god Shamash as an example of this error.
Right, worshiping the object itself. Praising the object itself is like profusely thanking a piece of bread for your meal.
Which makes no sense. A piece of bread has no agency, it has no consciousness, no will to feed you.
You must thank the baker who kneaded the dough and stoked the fire.
Exactly. Praising the sun as an independent, self-sustaining entity severs the logical connection to reality. True knowledge, according to the text, means looking at the sun and recognizing the precise, almost incomprehensible calibration of its placement in the solar system.
The fine-tuning of it all.
The text points out the delicate balance. If the Earth were placed just a fraction closer in its orbit, our oceans would boil and we would burn.
And a fraction further away, and the planet would be locked in permanent ice.
Right.
And then the speaker drops this incredible astronomical anomaly right in the middle of the philosophical argument. He starts talking about binary star systems.
This was a fascinating pivot.
For anyone who might not be an astrophysics nerd, the vast majority of star systems out there in the galaxy are binary, meaning they feature two stars orbiting around a common center of mass.
They usually come in pairs.
Yeah, but the speaker highlights that our sun is uniquely missing its partner. It lacks a binary companion.
It's flying solo.
And according to the source, scientists can look at the mathematical coordinates where a companion star theoretically should exist based on standard galactic formation, and that space is just empty.
What's fascinating here is how the speaker utilizes empirical observable data. The absence of this binary star is precisely what allows our solar system to maintain the delicate gravitational stability required to support complex life on Earth.
Because if a second star was there,
If a second massive stellar body were introduced into our system, the orbital mechanics would become completely chaotic. Earth would be subjected to wild, lethal swings in temperature and radiation. We couldn't exist.
So the speaker does not just present this missing star as dry textbook trivia.
No, he uses those empty coordinates in space as profound evidence of intentional design.
He reframes astrophysics as an act of spiritual awe. The speaker essentially says, you are special, O sun, precisely because your partner is missing.
It's almost poetic.
And because of that incredibly rare absence, humanity has a stable cradle in which to exist. He argues this proves our rare and special place in the cosmos, a concept he refers to as esrafayat, our nobility or unique value.
He looks at a gravitational anomaly, an empty pocket of space, and reads it as a love letter to humanity.
It's a beautiful way to look at the night sky.
It really is. And this is a flawless demonstration of the framework in action. He is taking the first B, the acquired, authentic scientific knowledge about orbital mechanics, and he's applying the second B.
Okay, so the second stage of the four.
Yes, the second stage is Belinsländer, which translates to consciousness or awareness. The Arabic term utilized in the text is shur.
Right, because just having the raw data about the missing binary star, knowing the math of the orbit, isn't enough on its own to fulfill the mind's right.
The text utilizes some very visceral, almost harsh analogies to explain the severe danger of stopping at just information.
What kind of analogy?
It states that knowledge that does not eventually lead to consciousness is like a pregnancy that never results in birth. The labor is wasted.
Oh, that is harsh.
Or, to use another botanical reference, it is like a fruit tree that manages to grow strong branches, produce green leaves, and even bloom with beautiful blossoms. But before those blossoms can mature into fruit, they are killed by an overnight frost.
All the potential was there. The tree did all the heavy biological lifting. It pulled nutrients from the soil, but it yielded absolutely nothing nourishing in the end.
Information without consciousness is just raw, unprocessed data. And the source provides a very specific, vital metric to help you determine if your knowledge is actually transformed into consciousness.
How do you measure that?
The metric is how that knowledge affects your ego.
Your ego.
Yes. True. Digested knowledge reveals to the knower just how staggeringly vast and complex the universe is, and consequently it reveals to the individual just how much they do not know.
The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Exactly. The natural, inevitable, biological byproduct of authentic knowledge is intense humility, or tevazu. The text argues forcefully that if a person's accumulation of knowledge breeds arrogance, pride, or a sense of superiority,
It means they miss the point.
it proves that the knowledge hasn't been digested at all. It is sitting raw in their stomach.
This feels like a massive indictment of how modern society treats intelligence and education.
Oh, without a doubt.
The speaker draws this incredible dividing line between viewing knowledge as a trust, which he calls eminent, versus viewing it as property, which is mulkiyet.
This is a crucial distinction.
The arrogant person, the one whose ego inflates with every book they read, views their knowledge as their personal property. But the text identifies a dark paradox here. When you treat knowledge as your exclusive property, the knowledge actually ends up owning you,
You become a captive to your own ego.
constantly needing to defend your intellectual territory, proving you're the smartest person in the room.
The wise person, conversely, views all acquired knowledge as a trust. And eminent in this cultural context is something highly valuable that is given to you temporarily for safekeeping.
Like borrowing something precious.
Yes, with the explicit expectation that you will deliver it to its rightful place or use it as intended by the original owner. Viewing knowledge as a trust keeps a person inherently restless.
Because they have a job to do.
Exactly. They cannot just sit on their degrees proudly. They feel a heavy moral responsibility to deliver that knowledge, to use it to illuminate the world around them.
Which brings up a great comparison in the text.
As the speaker pointedly notes, modern hard drives and server farms can hold vastly more data than any human brain could ever memorize.
A flash drive has more trivia than I do.
Right. But a hard drive completely lacks consciousness. If all a human being does is store data to win trivia nights or win arguments on the internet, they are biologically no different than a piece of silicon.
But let me push back on this, because we live in a global economy that literally runs on the concept of intellectual property.
It's the engine of modern capitalism.
Exactly. We hoard university degrees, we patent algorithms, we gatekeep data specifically to prove we are smarter, faster, or more innovative than our competitors. We use knowledge as a blunt weapon for market dominance.
It's highly competitive.
So if someone is listening to this while working in Silicon Valley or navigating academia, how do they reconcile this ancient philosophy of humility with a world that heavily rewards arrogance and hoarding? If they treat their knowledge as a public trust, won't they just get crushed by competitors treating it as property?
This raises an important question, and it highlights just how radically this philosophical framework subverts the values of the information age. The text isn't necessarily arguing against patents or making a living from your expertise.
It's not saying you can't have a job in tech.
No, it is targeting the internal psychological state of the individual. If we accumulate data simply to win arguments, to build an impenetrable personal brand, or to hoard wealth without feeling a responsibility to the broader human ecosystem,
We're failing the test.
the source argues we are fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of reality. We are artificially stunting our intellectual growth at the first bee. We are hoarding the raw, frosty blossoms.
Keeping the frost on the tree.
The framework demands that we allow the knowledge to percolate deeper, to shatter our ego, and to transform our consciousness. It is a dire warning against becoming a highly educated, deeply arrogant human hard drive. A CEO might own the patent, but if they lack the wisdom to see how their algorithm damages society, they are, according to this text, profoundly ignorant.
So if the first B is acquiring the authentic data by focusing the lens,
Right.
and the second B is letting that data humble you and incubate into consciousness, where do these two steps ultimately lead us?
They lead directly to the final two Bs, which are deeply intertwined and represent the pinnacle of this educational framework.
Okay, what are they?
The third is birlistir, meaning to unite, which corresponds to the profound philosophical concept of violate. And the fourth is butunlestir, meaning to integrate, corresponding to tefid.
And this section is where the speaker takes direct aim at the modern educational system.
He doesn't hold back here.
No, he argues forcefully for the absolute, indivisible unity of all sciences. He states that all authentic knowledge is divine, full stop. Physics, chemistry, zoology, biology, botany, These are not secular sciences that exist in opposition to theology and scripture, which we label as religious sciences.
Right, he rejects that binary completely.
He says that forcing the separation into different university buildings is a terrible, catastrophic mental fracture.
It is a profound paradigm shift for anyone raised in a Western educational model. The text points out that studying the physical world is essentially the act of reading a sacred material text.
Like the universe is a book itself.
Yes. The speaker asserts that reading the genetic verses of animals in a zoology lab or calculating the orbital verses of the stars in an observatory is functionally the exact same act of worship as reading the verses of the Quran.
He actually challenges the audience directly on this point. He asks, how can I possibly justify separating the zoologist from the theologian?
You can't, according to this framework.
One is deciphering the verses written into the anatomy of the animals. The other is deciphering the verses written in ink in the book. How can I separate the astronomer from the scholar of religious traditions? One reads the vast expanse of the sky, the other reads the text.
They're looking at the same truth from different angles.
Exactly. If you separate them, you break the mirror of reality. You end up with fragments that don't make sense on their own.
And to illustrate what this unity looks like in practice, the source points to the historical titans of knowledge, the great polymaths of the past.
Like who?
Figures like Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, and Al-Farabi. The text refers to these individuals as Hezarfen, which translates to Masters of 1,000 Sciences.
I love that title, Masters of 1,000 Sciences.
They are celebrated in this framework precisely because they did not suffer from this modern mental fracture. They did not recognize arbitrary boundaries between academic disciplines.
I love this historical detour in the source. The speaker talks about how one of these legendary scholars could write a massive, definitive, multi-volume commentary on complex religious jurisprudence in the morning.
Right, deep theological work.
And then after lunch, sit down and invent an entirely new musical instrument.
Which is just mind-blowing.
And not just play a tune on it, but mathematically design the acoustics, calculate the string tension, and invent it from scratch.
Because to a mind operating under Tedbiryay, or integration, the mathematics of acoustics, the biological anatomy of the human ear, and the theology of divine revelation were all just different harmonious chapters of the exact same book.
They weren't switching gears.
No, they possessed a truly holistic intellect. When they looked at the physical world, they weren't trying to conquer it. They were trying to discover the secrets of the Creator embedded within the physical laws of creation.
So what does this all mean for us today? Because our modern education system basically forces you to pick a lane by the time you're 18 years old.
Oh, absolutely.
You are either a STEM person focused on math, engineering, and hard data, or you are a humanities person focused on art, literature, and philosophy. And society treats these disciplines like they exist on completely different planets.
They put you in completely different buildings on campus.
Right. This philosophy is basically saying, stop picking lanes. You are supposed to drive on the whole highway.
The text identifies the consequences of our modern segregation of knowledge as nothing less than a great disaster.
A great disaster.
The speaker laments the existence of two very specific, deeply tragic archetypes that currently dominate the modern world: the knowing atheist and the ignorant believer.
Let's define those, because they feel incredibly relevant to where we are culturally.
Okay, let's start with the first one.
The knowing atheist represents someone who has amassed incredible amounts of authentic scientific data. They understand the mechanics of the universe perfectly, they know the math, they have the patents.
They have all the data points.
But they have absolutely no spiritual connection or consciousness of the creator behind it all. Going back to the metaphor we used earlier, they see the finger pointing at the moon, they map the fingerprints in high-definition detail, they publish papers on the cellular makeup of the fingernail, but they stubbornly refuse to ever look up at the moon.
That is a perfect summary. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the ignorant believer.
What does that look like?
This represents a person who possesses faith, who perhaps meticulously follows religious rituals and traditions, but who possesses absolutely no authentic knowledge of the physical world.
They just ignore the science entirely.
They don't understand the sciences, they don't understand history or sociology, and therefore their faith is incredibly fragile, intellectually shallow, and completely detached from the reality of the world they live in.
They are trying to read the book without looking at the world.
The source suggests that when society is polarized between these two incomplete archetypes, we are facing an intellectual apocalypse.
The speaker uses a very strong, heavily weighted word to describe this state of affairs. He calls it fesad, which translates to corruption.
But he defines corruption in a very specific, non-traditional way.
Right, because we usually think of corruption as politicians taking bribes or stealing money.
Exactly. But here, he says corruption is using knowledge to actively divide people or to sever the cosmic connections that are meant to be whole.
It is defined as the violent act of cutting. He gives several examples of this intellectual severing.
Like cutting physical matter away from spiritual meaning.
Severing human emotion from rational thought.
Divorcing empirical reason from divine revelation.
And the text condemns two extreme lifestyles that result from this severing. First, it strongly condemns extreme asceticism, the idea of ignoring the material world completely, fleeing to the mountains, and throwing away all worldly responsibilities to focus solely on the spiritual realm.
The speaker actually mocks this slightly.
Yeah, he portrays someone who just wants to sit in a corner, eat a dry piece of toast, and ignore the suffering and complex beauty of the world. By doing so, they are severing a bond God intended them to actively engage with.
And on the flip side, he also condemns extreme literalism.
He talks about people who chant only the text, meaning they obsessively follow the literal surface-level words of Scripture while entirely abandoning human intellect, reason, and scientific discovery.
Which is just as damaging.
He says that person is also cutting the bond. They are insulting the right of the mind to think and process.
It all circles back to the foundational requirement of deep, relentless thinking. The text brings up the concept of Tedbiryay again here at the very end to seal the argument.
Right.
It explicitly, unequivocally rejects blind obedience. It states that true understanding requires reading between the lines, and crucially, reading behind the lines.
You can't just take it at face value.
You don't just passively ask, well, what did this text or this scientific phenomenon say? You must actively ask, what is the intent behind what is being said or shown? Engaging both the sharp edge of the intellect and the depth of the spirit is a non-negotiable requirement of this entire philosophy.
It's an incredible, expansive journey we've been on in this deep dive. We started by simply looking at an ordinary light bulb and realizing that behind that thin glass is a massive, invisible chain of interconnected labor, physics, and ecology, stretching all the way back to the mountains and the clouds.
We explored how our very biological ability to focus our eyes and ears, to blur out the endless noise and isolate a single truth, is the physical root of wisdom.
We observed how scientific data, like the missing binary companion star in our solar system, isn't just arbitrary trivia, but a profound footnote pointing toward immense intention and humanity's unique value in the cosmos.
And we unpacked the challenging idea that true digested knowledge must foster humility, transforming raw, cold data into conscious, empathetic awareness.
And finally, we saw the argument that biology, physics, astronomy, and theology aren't competing disciplines fighting for funding. They are all just different, vital chapters of the exact same ultimate book.
The source material makes a deeply compelling argument that every single piece of authentic knowledge, from the gravitational orbit of a massive sun down to the microscopic cellular structure of a green leaf, is a verse waiting to be read by a conscious mind.
So as we wrap up, what should the listener take away from all this?
The final thought I want to leave you with as you go about your day is this. What book of reality in your own life, whether it's a field of science, a challenging relationship, or an overlooked aspect of nature, are you currently ignoring simply because you didn't think it was connected to your ultimate purpose?
That is definitely a lot to chew on, and it will change how I look at just about everything in my house.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Until next time, keep asking why.
This material is a deeply philosophical, theological transcript exploring the inherent rights of creation, the epistemological nature of knowledge, and the ultimate pursuit of unified conscious intellect. So a key theme running through this material seems to be how human awareness interacts with the divine, which brings us to our first major area for constructive analysis.
Right, diving right in.
Yeah, so as I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that absolutely everything in existence has a right that must be honored. And the material makes a really strong case for this by highlighting a beautifully vivid, cascading metaphor early on.
Oh, the light bulb one.
Exactly, the light bulb. The author asks us to consider the simple act of just, turning on a light bulb. In that momentary flick of a switch, you are suddenly stepping into this immense invisible web of responsibilities and rights.
Yeah, it's wild how far they take it.
It really is, because there is the right of the bulb itself. Naturally. But that traces backward. It traces to the right of the copper wiring hidden in the wall, the right of the engineers who drafted the electrical grid, the laborers who laid the cables.
The turbines at the dam, right?
Right, the massive turbines, the force of the water pushing them, the mountains that gathered the water, the clouds that rained upon the mountains, and ultimately, the divine creator who authored the clouds. It's just a breathtaking, expansive way to establish the concept of cosmic interconnectedness.
It really gives the reader the ultimate why. The illit behind our physical existence.
Yes, exactly. But then, right after establishing this incredibly organic, flowing imagery, the text hits what feels like, a concrete wall. It abruptly shifts into this highly structured methodology called the 4 Bs.
Yeah. Inform, create consciousness, unite, and integrate.
Right, or in the original Turkish phrasing, Bilgilander, Bilinçlander, Birleştir, Bütünleştir. Reading this transition, honestly, it felt like listening to a beautiful, flowing poem that is suddenly interrupted by someone, presenting a corporate PowerPoint slide.
The progression from the evocative chain of rights metaphor to the highly structured 4-point framework feels structurally abrupt and leaves potential narrative momentum on the table.
Yeah, momentum is definitely lost there.
Because, the text does an incredible job building immense rhetorical power by tracing the physical rights of mundane objects all the way back to a divine creator. As a reader, you feel this profound sense of awe.
Oh, totally. You feel primed.
Exactly. You are primed to understand the absolute necessity of seeking the ultimate cause of things. But then, the text simply abandons this organic imagery. It introduces the 4 Bs almost entirely in a vacuum.
It's jarring.
It really is. It fails to utilize the massive emotional and conceptual momentum of the preceding metaphor to ground this entirely new framework. You are suspended in this cosmic web of clouds and dams and light, and then you're suddenly dropped onto cold, hard ground to look at a rigid 4-point list.
I have to admit, though, I do understand the author's instinct here. You can't just leave people floating up in the clouds forever. You have to give them practical steps to apply the philosophy.
Right, of course.
So are we saying the framework itself is a problem, or just how the author transitions into it? Because we really do need the practical how.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered explicitly using the culmination of that very metaphor, the necessity of knowing the ultimate cause, as the direct launching pad for the 4 Bs.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, the framework itself is vital, but the suggestion here is to reframe it. Instead of presenting the 4 Bs as a separate, detached syllabus of goals, present them as the exact practical methodology required to actually fulfill those nested rights we just spent so much time marveling at.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. By doing this, you aren't just giving the reader a cold list to memorize. You're handing them the specific tools required to honor the universe.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is that it treats the framework as an action plan for the poetry. It completely justifies the list. But how do we actually execute that on the page without, asking the author to rewrite the entire middle section of the essay?
It really just requires installing a conceptual bridge. Imagine adding a dedicated transition sentence directly linking the two concepts right before the framework begins.
Like what, for example?
Well, the author could write something like, to truly honor the rights of the intellect, the falling rain, and the engineers, we cannot remain passive observers. We must follow a deliberate 4-step path of learning.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, a simple sentence like that immediately tells the reader that the 4 Bs are the action plan for the poetry. The elements shake hands.
That definitely helps smooth the aesthetic whiplash. But it still feels a little bit like we are stepping out of the metaphor to hand them a manual. Can we weave the imagery even deeper into the steps themselves?
Yes, and that is where the author can unlock some serious creative synergy. They could carry the light bulb imagery directly into the explanation of those first 2 Bs.
Wait, how would that work?
So, when defining the first B, which is inform or gaining raw knowledge, the author could explain that gathering information is like laying the electrical cable through the walls of a house. It is absolutely essential infrastructure, but on its own, the room remains dark.
Ah, and then the second B?
Then, when explaining the second B, which is create consciousness, they frame it as finally flipping the switch. The raw information is now illuminated. Using thematic callbacks like this weaves the two sections together seamlessly.
I love that approach. The reader never has to leave the metaphor to understand the mechanics. You keep them inside the house with the light bulb the entire time.
Exactly.
Now, this tendency to jump from an interconnected, holistic you into categorized, separated components, it doesn't just happen with the structure. It's the exact same conceptual trap the author falls into when defining how we actually learn.
Yeah, the epistemology section.
Right. Let's look closely at the section discussing the epistemological definition of knowledge, or ilm. The text defines knowledge as tamyiz, which translates to the act of separating, distinguishing, and categorizing.
And they use some fantastic, relatable physiological examples there.
They do. It points out that for the human eye to actually see, it must localize and separate one object from its surroundings. If you try to look at every single item in a crowded room at once, everything is just a blur, right? You see nothing.
Same with hearing. If the ear tries to absorb 50 conversations simultaneously, it hears pure static. It must select and isolate one sound wave to truly listen.
Exactly. But here is my pushback, and it's a pretty major philosophical tension I felt while reading. If the very definition of knowledge is fundamentally about isolating and dividing things to understand them, doesn't that inherently contradict the material's later condemnation of division?
Ah, the critique of tefrika?
Yes! The text heavily criticizes tefrika, or separation, and champions the ultimate goal of unity, or wahdat. To use an analogy, it feels like taking a beautifully complex pocket watch apart piece by piece to understand how the gears work.
Right, you isolate the springs, the cogs, the hands.
But if you never put it back together, you don't have a watch anymore. You just have a pile of shiny parts on a table that can't tell time. How on earth do we reconcile this for the reader?
The philosophical definition of knowledge as an act of separation risks clashing with the ultimate teleological goal of unity if the synthesis between the two is not explicitly articulated.
Yeah, it really does.
You have zeroed in on a massive conceptual paradox in the text. The material argues so powerfully and persuasively for epistemological separation. It utterly convinces the reader that to learn anything, we must narrow our focus, we must divide, we must isolate the data.
Absolutely.
Yet, just a few paragraphs later, it strongly condemns knowledge that separates and praises knowledge that unites. The listener is left entirely stranded. There is no conceptual bridge explaining how an act of division logically leads to an outcome of unity.
It's super confusing.
It creates a paradox but doesn't hand the reader the key to unlock it.
It is a heavy philosophical knot, and honestly, it makes the reader feel a bit betrayed. I mean, you handed me a saw, told me I had to cut the wood to understand its internal grain, and then you blame me for the wood being in two pieces.
That's a great way to put it.
You can't treat the primary tool of learning as a spiritual crime.
Is a connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster? Because right now, the text forces the reader to guess how those two ideas coexist.
So how do we fix it?
The necessary fix here is to clearly and explicitly articulate the critical distinction between methodological separation, which is merely a mechanical necessity for the limited human mind to acquire facts, and spiritual integration, which is the ultimate purpose of gathering those facts in the first place.
Oh, wow. Methodological separation versus spiritual integration.
Yes, the material needs to show the reader that separating to learn is not the same thing as dividing to destroy.
That distinction is crucial. It changes the act of separation from a permanent toxic state into a temporary, necessary step in a much larger process. But if we introduce terms like methodological necessity and spiritual integration, don't we run the risk of burying the reader in even more dense philosophical jargon?
That's a fair point.
I mean, we're already asking them to juggle tamiz, tefrika, and wahdat. How do we make this abstract philosophical distinction tangible without sounding like a university lecture?
That is a very valid concern, and it means the solution must be grounded in recognizable human experiences. The author could introduce a clarifying caveat right after they define tamiz.
Like a direct, simple explanation?
Exactly. They could add a simple, highly conversational sentence that assigns clear roles to our faculties. Something like, while the finite human mind must temporarily isolate and categorize to acquire data, the conscious heart must eventually take that data and synthesize it back together to achieve unity.
I really appreciate that framing. It designates specific jobs. The mind's job is to divide and conquer to comprehend the mechanics, but the heart's job is to unite the pieces to achieve worship.
Right, it instantly diffuses the contradiction.
The mind takes the watch apart, but the heart puts it back together so it can tell time again.
Exactly. And building on that, the author can ensure there is no lingering linguistic confusion by proactively contrasting the Arabic terms being used. Put them side by side.
Contrast temyiz and tefrika directly?
Yes. The author could explicitly contrast the positive, necessary concept of methodological tamyiz, which is the healthy act of distinguishing truth from falsehood, or signal from noise, with the destructive, toxic concept of tefrika,
which is severing the bond?
Right, tefrika is the act of spiritually severing the inherent bond between the material world and the divine. By putting those two concepts in the same room and drawing a hard boundary between them, the author understands that dissecting a biology subject to study its cells doesn't mean you are spiritually severing the organism from God.
It completely protects the reader from their own logical assumptions. If you don't map out that sequence, the reader is going to trip over the contradiction, stare at the pile of watch parts, and miss the deeper theological point completely.
Oh, definitely.
And, this tendency to separate the parts from the whole doesn't just happen with the definition of knowledge. It's the exact same trap the author falls into when discussing secular science versus theology. Let's pivot to the material-specific treatment of those two fields.
The science and scripture angle.
Yeah, towards the latter part of the transcript, the author makes a truly profound, paradigm-shifting argument. They argue that studying zoology, botany, or astronomy is functionally equivalent to reading divine verses, or ayats.
It's a really bold claim.
It is. The text asserts that historical polymaths like Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, and Ibn Rushd achieved greatness precisely because they completely refused to separate the scientific from the sacred. They viewed the physical universe itself as a text to be read, literally no different than scripture.
That's fascinating. What are the potential limitations or counter-arguments to that idea? Because from where I sit, this is arguably the most brilliant and earth-shattering idea in the entire transcript.
That is exactly my pushback on the text structure. This is a massive thesis. It fundamentally redefines how a modern person should view physics, chemistry, or engineering. But it feels entirely buried.
Right, it comes in way too late.
It's tucked away near the end of the material, almost as if it's a supporting detail or just an interesting historical tangent. It is certainly not treated as the central, guiding thesis it clearly has the power to be.
The compelling and radical argument that studying the natural sciences is equivalent to reading divine scripture is currently buried late in the text and could be far more effective as a central framing device.
Yeah, framing device is the perfect term for it.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on laying down foundational definitions early on might overlook the necessity of hooking the reader with your most powerful idea?
I think that's exactly what's happening here.
The structural vulnerability here is that by burying this profound concept, the idea that the universe is a text of verses just like a holy book, the material completely misses the chance to captivate the audience from the very first page.
And it undermines the other points they make early on, too.
Exactly. Furthermore, early in the text, the author spends significant time complaining about ignorant religious people and religionless knowledgeable people. But those complaints lack their full rhetorical punch because the reader doesn't yet know what the author's solution to that societal fracture actually is.
Yeah, the problem is introduced pages and pages before the paradigm-shifting solution is revealed.
It makes for a very uneven reading experience.
It is incredibly frustrating as a reader. It's like listening to someone complain about a locked door for 20 minutes before they casually mentioned they've had the key in their pocket the entire time.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you show the audience the key first, the entire discussion about the locked door becomes infinitely more interesting, because now we're actively talking about how to unlock it, rather than just venting frustration that the door is closed.
That was a perfect way to conceptualize the narrative drag. The structural suggestion here is to elevate this universe as a text concept to the very beginning of the material.
Move it all the way to the front?
Yes, take that brilliant radical thesis and use it as the foundational anchor for the entire argument about why knowledge matters. By declaring early on that science and scripture are two sides of the exact same divine coin, every subsequent point the author makes about unity, consciousness, and the rights of creation will carry twice as much conceptual weight.
I have to challenge that a bit, though. If we take the biggest revelation in the entire transcript, the grand synthesis of science and scripture, and we just slap it on page 1, don't we risk completely ruining the narrative buildup? Won't the rest of the text just feel like a long, drawn-out letdown if we give away the ultimate punchline immediately?
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like the idea that this thesis isn't a punchline at all, but rather a lens?
A lens?
Right. If you give the reader the correct lens early, everything they read afterward looks different and much richer. It doesn't spoil the ending, it frames the journey.
Okay, that shifts the perspective completely. But how do we install that lens early without forcing the author to clunkily rewrite their entire introduction?
We can integrate it seamlessly by revisiting that incredible opening metaphor we discussed at the start of the critique.
The light bulb and the dam?
Exactly. When the author introduces the light bulb, the dam, and the electrical grid, they could foreshadow this grand thesis right then and there. They could explicitly call the intricate engineering of the electrical grid a verse of creation.
Oh, wow.
Instead of waiting until page 10 to say that science is an ayah, say it on page 1. Just a brief line like, the engineers who built the dam were interacting with a divine verse of physics. This instantly sets the paradigm for everything that follows.
That is a brilliant adjustment. It instantly validates the physical sciences within a theological framework. It looks the secular engineer right in the eye and tells them, your daily work is deeply spiritual work.
Exactly. It bridges the gap immediately.
It hooks the secular reader and the religious reader simultaneously because it bridges their worlds in the first paragraph.
Precisely. And to reinforce that lens, the author could move the historical examples of Ibn Sina, al-Ghazali, and the polymaths much earlier in the text.
Where would they fit best?
Specifically, present them right after introducing the problem of the ignorant religious people and the unbelieving scientists. Right after defining that very real modern societal fracture, immediately offer Ibn Sina as the historical blueprint for the solution.
Show them it's already been done.
Yes. Show the reader that the rift between science and religion is a modern illusion, and that the greatest minds in human history thrived precisely because they viewed a biology textbook and a theological manuscript as two chapters of the exact same divine book.
That makes so much sense.
Restructuring the text this way ensures the author's most powerful idea serves as the engine driving the entire piece forward, rather than dragging behind as the caboose.
That structural flip completely changes the energy of the piece. It transforms the text from a steady, slow philosophical climb into an immediate intellectual provocation. It grabs you by the collar right out of the gate and demands that you look at the world differently.
It really does.
Well, this has been an incredibly rich, robust exploration of a truly profound piece of writing. The underlying logic here is so strong, it just needs its architecture adjusted to let that logic shine at full wattage. To concisely recap our 3 actionable takeaways for the author.
Right, let's summarize.
Third, bridge the gap between the poetic and the practical. Carry the vivid mechanical and natural metaphors like the light bulb and the electrical grid all the way through the transition to introduce the 4 B's framework. Frame the steps of informing and creating consciousness as the direct practical methodology needed to honor those inherent rights. Don't let the poem turn into a dry PowerPoint.
Definitely.
Second, explicitly bridge the philosophical gap between understanding knowledge as an act of separation, or tamyiz, and the ultimate goal of unity, or vadet. Clarify the sequence for the reader, showing that the finite mind must divide the data to learn, but the conscious heart must integrate that data to worship. Don't leave them stranded with a pile of disconnected watch parts.
Such a critical distinction.
And third, elevate the most powerful concept in the text, the paradigm-shifting idea of the natural sciences as divine verses, to the very front of the material to serve as the core, overarching lens. Use it to hook the reader immediately and drive the narrative momentum.
Yeah, put the key in their hand right away.
Exactly.
We warmly invite the author to experiment with these structural and thematic adjustments and to submit their revised material back to this critique for further exploration. The core ideas here are breathtaking. They just need to be structurally aligned so they hit the reader with the full force they so clearly deserve.
It's going to be an amazing revision.
Ultimately, refining a profound piece of writing like this is much like that opening metaphor. It is all about laying the right cables in the right order so that when the reader finally flips the switch, the illumination is undeniable.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are diving into a really fundamental question about the very nature of learning.
Right. Specifically, how we approach the physical universe.
Exactly. Like, when we study the physical universe, does keeping ultimate, divine purpose out of the equation make our science more rigorous? Or does separating empirical observation from spiritual meaning create this disastrous fracture in our understanding of reality?
It's a massive question.
It really is. And I'll be arguing from the perspective of our source material today, which suggests that true knowledge is inherently teleological, meaning, it's always moving toward a final purpose. Separating the material from the spiritual isn't just an educational preference, it's an actual failure to comprehend reality as a unified whole.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I'm grounding my argument in the material's own structural definitions of learning. I'll be arguing that the human brain requires isolation and separation to learn anything at all.
By isolation, you mean separating disciplines, right?
Right. By demanding that every science class instantly become a theology lecture, or by forcing every physical fact to act as a metaphysical footnote, we risk destroying the very analytical focus that human comprehension fundamentally relies on.
Well, to really get to the heart of this tension, let's start with an analogy from the material. Imagine you're standing in the middle of a dense, totally chaotic symphony.
Okay.
There are 50 different instruments playing completely different overlapping melodies, all at exactly the same time at full volume.
I mean, if you're standing right in the middle of that, it wouldn't even be music.
No, it would be pure chaos.
Yeah, it would just be a wall of pure noise. Your brain wouldn't be able to appreciate a single note, let alone map out a cohesive melody.
Exactly. So for you to actually hear the first violin, your cognitive apparatus has to aggressively filter out the brass, the percussion, the woodwinds. You have to mentally isolate that one specific sound out of the 50.
Right. The brain has to limit its scope in order to perceive anything at all. It's a functional necessity. We often like to think of perception as this grand opening up of the mind, but structurally, cognitive science tells us it's mostly an act of shutting things out. You delete information to create focus.
And that precise tension between isolating a single variable to understand it and then pulling back to see the unified whole, that is the bedrock of our discussion today.
Absolutely.
It has to move through a specific progression to be considered true knowledge.
Right, the framework we can call the 4 Bs.
Yes, 4 sequential stages that transform raw data into ultimate truth, moving from basic information to consciousness, to unity, and finally to integration with the divine.
Wait, let me stop you right there. Because if we're going to use this framework, we really need to understand how these leaps actually happen.
Sure, they are big leaps.
Right, because I know what it means to inform someone. I can inform you that water is H2O. But how does basic chemical information suddenly become consciousness? That feels like a massive jump.
It is a great question, and it's where the text philosophy really starts. Informing is just the raw data, like knowing water is H2O.
Okay, just the facts.
Right, but that becomes consciousness when you contextualize it. It happens when you realize your own body relies on that exact molecule to survive, that the entire ecosystem is delicately balanced upon its properties. You become conscious of its vital role.
Okay, I track with that.
Then it moves to unify, when you see how water connects the oceans to the clouds to the rivers, tying all earthly systems together into a single unified biosphere.
And the final step?
Integration is the realization that this perfectly calibrated, unified system didn't design itself. It points directly to a creator.
So the argument is that stopping at step 1, just knowing it's H2O, means you don't actually possess knowledge?
The text would say you possess data or perhaps property, but not true ilm. And the engine driving this progression is the concept of rights.
The inherent rights of things?
Exactly. The material argues that everything in existence has an inherent right. The right of water is to sustain life. The right of the human intellect is to ask questions and learn.
But the ultimate right belongs to the creator of all these systems.
So it all flows upward.
Yes. Therefore, knowledge only achieves the status of true ilm when it fulfills that ultimate right by recognizing empirical facts as signs pointing to a unified truth. If knowledge stops at the data and breeds arrogance, it isn't an entrusted gift. It's a hoarded commodity.
I mean, that is a beautifully constructed moral framework. I genuinely appreciate the holistic vision there.
But I sense a but coming.
Oh, absolutely. I have to push back hard on the idea that this functions as a practical epistemology, like a practical way of actually acquiring knowledge day to day.
Why is that?
Because the text itself provides a highly rigorous structural definition of learning that contradicts this grand synthesis. It defines ilm as tamiz.
Meaning the act of distinguishing or filtering, right?
Exactly. Tamiz is the act of selecting, separating, and isolating variables. The text uses the exact analogy we opened with, the human senses.
The symphony example.
Right, or vision. To see, the eye must localize and limit its field of vision. It has to crop the world out. To hear, the ear must isolate one sound out of 50.
True, you have to focus.
So this structural necessity to isolate in order to perceive, it stands in profound tension with the demand to immediately synthesize all findings into theological conclusions.
I'm not sure they are in tension, though.
I think they are. If I am a zoologist, my mind must execute tamiz. It must separate and focus strictly on the cellular structure of a specific animal. By demanding that we never sever the physical observation from the metaphysical origin, we risk destroying the very analytical focus the text admits is required for human comprehension.
Well, I see why you think that focus is threatened. If you're an engineer listening to this, you're probably wondering how you're supposed to build a bridge if you have to meditate on the divine every time you calculate a load-bearing vector.
Exactly. You would never get the bridge built.
But let's look at how the material applies this in the physical world using its electrical grid analogy.
The chain of dependencies.
Right. The text argues that fulfilling the right of a simple glowing light bulb requires acknowledging the entire causal chain. You look at the light bulb, but the knowledge of that light isn't complete unless you acknowledge the socket, the wire, and the household grid.
Which makes sense from an engineering standpoint.
But you can't stop there. You must acknowledge the engineers who drafted the plans, the laborers who laid the high-tension lines over the mountains, the dams generating the power.
And the rain feeding the dams.
Exactly. The rain, the clouds, and ultimately the creator who designed the water cycle itself. True knowledge cannot arbitrarily stop at the light bulb. To say you know how this bulb works while ignoring the cloud and the creator is to possess a fractured, incomplete understanding.
That is a very poetic way to view reality, but let's apply the text's own definition of human limitation here. What is the cognitive load of that chain?
It's a lot to hold in your mind, certainly.
It's impossible to hold. If a human tries to hear all 50 sounds at once, they hear none. They are deafened by the noise. Let's map that onto our engineer.
Okay, let's map it.
If an electrical engineer designing a high-tension wire is forced to simultaneously contemplate the divine origins of rain, the physics of clouds, and the theology of creation, they lose the necessary focus to calculate the voltage correctly.
But acknowledging the origin doesn't mean you lose the math. It frames the math. It gives the math its proper context, so it isn't misused.
I would argue that the necessity of tamiz, of distinction and separation, means that breaking the chain is structurally necessary for human progress. It is not a moral failure to look only at the light bulb. It is an analytical prerequisite.
You think we have to put up blinders?
We have to bracket off the metaphysical to measure the physical. If we don't put up those blinders, we can't build the dam in the first place.
I understand the fear of cognitive overload, but you're suggesting that isolation requires forgetting the larger context.
Not forgetting, just temporarily suspending it.
Well, the source material addresses this brilliantly through the etymology of the word hikmet, or wisdom. Do you recall how it breaks down that root?
It connects it to the concept of tying an animal, if I remember correctly.
Precisely. The root of the word for wisdom comes from the act of tying an animal to a specific post so it doesn't wander off.
Right, creating a boundary.
The text uses this to explain that having a coherent thought or mastering a discipline means binding the intellect to a specific point of truth. You isolate the variable, yes?
You tie the animal to the post so you can examine it.
Right.
But tying the animal to a post in the barn doesn't mean you forget who owns the farm.
Sure, you tie the animal to the post so it doesn't run away. But if you spend all day staring at the post, making sure you are perfectly aligned with the owner of the farm, the barn could burn down around you.
That seems a bit dramatic.
I mean it practically. Doesn't earthly science require us to just focus strictly on the animal and the post for a while? Your immediate universe temporarily has to be just the rope.
Only temporarily, as a mechanism of deeper understanding. But true focus in earthly science actually requires an anchor in absolute truth.
How so?
If you sever the rope completely, if you say the farm owner doesn't exist and the post is just floating in a void, the intellect drifts into meaninglessness. It becomes disconnected data.
I'm not saying the farm owner doesn't exist, just that the zoologist doesn't need to consult him to study the animal.
The text explicitly argues that when we distinguish between someone studying zoology, calling them a reader of animal verses, and someone studying theology, calling them a reader of Quranic verses, we are suffering from a mental fracture. They are both reading verses of the exact same author.
Let's lean into this idea of a mental fracture, because this is where the historical and societal consequences of our categorization really come to a head.
Okay, let's explore that.
The text claims that separating these disciplines, saying this person is a secular scientist and this person is a religious theologian, is a modern delusion. But I look at that separation of disciplines and I see the birth of specialized rigor.
You see as a positive evolution.
Absolutely. We need the cellular biologists to dedicate their entire cognitive bandwidth to mapping proteins without feeling obligated to synthesize those proteins into a theological framework by Friday afternoon. The separation is not a fracture, it's the scaffolding of modern discovery.
But is it actually impossible to hold both? Because history tells us a different story. If we look at the great historical examples the text provides...
You mean the polymaths?
Yes, the Hazarfin. Figures like Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, Al-Farabi. These were individuals who possessed whole system thinking. They didn't need your scaffolding.
They were exceptional intellects, undoubtedly. But they were operating in a completely different era of scientific complexity.
They were master synthesizers. They wrote profound theological treatises, while simultaneously inventing new musical instruments, charting human anatomy, and revolutionizing medicine.
Which is incredible, yes.
They proved in their very lives that you can dive to the absolute depths of specialized earthly science without severing it from divine consciousness. They didn't suffer from the mental fracture. They treated the physical world as a direct extension of divine knowledge.
I do not dispute their genius for a second. But using once-in-a-century historical polymaths like Ibn Sina as the baseline for how all human epistemology must function is dangerous.
Dangerous? Why?
Because the average human mind relies on institutions to learn, and institutions rely on boundaries. You cannot build a modern university system assuming every undergraduate is Al-Ghazali.
But look at the societal cost of building those boundaries. The text warns of a modern catastrophe that this exact fracture has caused.
What catastrophe?
Because we built institutions that severed the physical from the metaphysical. It says we have ended up in a world where the knowledgeable people are devoid of religion and the religious people are devoid of knowledge.
That is a stark way to put it.
The scientist has the data but no moral anchor, and the theologian has the moral anchor but no understanding of how the world actually works. That is the disaster of severing the disciplines.
I completely agree that the text identifies a profound modern catastrophe there. It's a very accurate diagnosis of modern tribalism.
So you agree the fracture is real?
I'm not convinced by its conclusion regarding the cause. Is that catastrophe really caused by the separation of disciplines? Or is it caused by a failure to respect the boundaries of distinct types of knowledge?
What do you mean by boundary violations?
When the religious person tries to use theology to answer a question about quantum mechanics, they fail and they look foolish. When the scientist tries to use empirical data to disprove the existence of a metaphysical soul, they overstep and they look arrogant.
So you're saying both sides are just using the wrong tools?
Exactly. The catastrophe isn't that the disciplines are separate. The catastrophe is that neither side respects the limits of their own tools. Even across vastly different scales,
Let's look at the cosmic scale actually, because the text uses a very specific astronomical example to drive this home.
The example regarding the sun's trajectory.
Yes. The material points out a fascinating astronomical detail. It notes that out of the roughly 400 billion suns out there, our sun has a missing partner in its orbit.
A mathematical anomaly, right?
Exactly. There's a mathematical anomaly in its trajectory that points to a missing companion star. The text uses this incredibly specific scientific observation to highlight the profound intended unique nature of Earth and human existence.
Okay, I follow the observation.
It argues that if you look at the sun, observe its immense power and its perfectly calibrated distance from the Earth, where a little closer we burn to a crisp, and a little further we freeze solid.
The habitable zone.
Right. If you look at all that and you stop at mere empirical awe, you have failed the test of knowledge.
The text brings up the ancient practice of worshiping the sun, like Shamash, the Mesopotamian god, right?
Exactly. If you just marvel at the astronomical object itself, it becomes an idol. You've stripped the knowledge of its consciousness.
And how does the text phrase the alternative?
As it memorably puts it, you're thanking the bread instead of the baker. Bread doesn't understand gratitude, it didn't bake itself. True knowledge of the cosmos must induce humility and point directly back to the Creator's specific design.
And if it doesn't?
If it doesn't, all those orbital calculations are just cold, dead data.
And this is where we hit the absolute core of our disagreement. I challenge the assertion that knowledge lacking theological humility reverts to mere data, or somehow loses its epistemological validity.
You think it's still true knowledge without the greater context.
Let's look closely at that astronomical discovery. The calculation of the sun's trajectory, the observation of the missing orbital partner, the math required to understand the habitable zone. That remains valid, objective ilm.
Even without acknowledging the designer?
It is objective knowledge, regardless of the personal humility or the religious beliefs of the astronomer who calculated it.
But is it complete knowledge? If it doesn't raise consciousness, as the 4 Bs dictate, if it doesn't move from inform to integrate, it hasn't fulfilled its inherent purpose.
Complete in a spiritual sense? I concede it might not be. But valid in an epistemological sense? Absolutely.
The text demands that knowledge must be used for vahted, for unity, rather than tefrika, or division.
Right. It states that anyone who uses knowledge for division should be crossed out, no matter how much they know, because even a computer hard drive holds data.
Exactly.
But inserting this requirement introduces a highly subjective moral filter onto the scientific method.
I don't see how unity is a subjective filter. The unified, interconnected nature of reality is the text's entire baseline premise.
It becomes subjective because who gets to define what unites and what divides?
Well, truth unites.
I know a lot of our listeners might hear a phrase like theological footnote and immediately worry about science denialism, because history is full of moments where a valid scientific discovery challenged a prevailing theological narrative.
And the authorities resisted it.
And the religious authorities viewed that discovery as causing division. If we apply the text standards strictly, we risk dismissing objectively true empirical findings simply because they don't immediately serve a unifying theological framework.
You're worried it gives veto power over science?
We risk throwing out the astronomer's math because we don't like the astronomer's attitude. That is the very real danger of refusing to separate the realms.
I hear your concern, and it's a valid historical fear. But I think you're slightly mischaracterizing the text definition of unity.
How so?
Unity here isn't about social conformity or protecting fragile religious narratives from the threat of scientific truth. Remember, the text confidently states that every type of authentic, sound knowledge is a verse or a sign from the Creator.
So it doesn't reject science itself?
There is zero fear of earthly science in this framework. The text embraces biology, botany, physics, chemistry. It considers them all sacred disciplines.
It embraces them, but it claims them completely. It says they only have value if they answer to theology.
It claims them because the intellect's most fundamental, primal drive is to ask why. The text is very clear on this. The first question of the human mind isn't how, it is why. The question of ultimate cause and purpose.
Which is a philosophical question.
You cannot achieve wisdom without asking for the cause. And empirical science, by its own self-imposed, bracketed rules, only asks how.
Right, it measures mechanisms.
It measures gravity. It doesn't explain why gravity exists to foster life. The text is arguing that an epistemology that restricts itself solely to how is artificially stunting the human intellect.
So it has to bridge both. True knowledge must bridge the empirical observation with divine consciousness because that is the only possible way to answer the why.
That is a powerful distinction between how and why. But my central point is that the text is simultaneously relying on the exact mechanics of how to make its case.
You mean the temyi's concept?
It openly acknowledges that human cognition operates through temyi's, through strict, limiting, analytical separation. We only understand the universe by breaking it into manageable, isolated pieces.
Right.
The compelling tension here, which I don't think the text fully resolves, is how an ordinary individual can realistically maintain the hyper-focused, bracketed attention required to map the human genome or calculate orbital mechanics, while simultaneously carrying the cognitive load of treating every single data point as a profound theological revelation.
It's undeniably difficult. It requires a massive paradigm shift. It requires viewing the physical universe not as a dead machine to be cataloged, but as a living text to be read.
A living text.
As we wrap up our discussion, I keep coming back to that concept of the rights of the intellect. The material argues that knowledge is not something we own. It is not a territory we conquer. It is something entrusted to us.
An entrusted responsibility.
Our deepest responsibility is to take that raw, cold information, elevate it to consciousness, use it to unify our understanding of reality, and ultimately integrate it into a holistic recognition of the Creator. It's an ambitious framework, yes, but it's the only one that honors both the mind and the soul.
And while I deeply respect that holistic vision, and frankly, I think modern science could use a little more humility, I remain anchored in the belief that the boundaries between disciplines exist for a structural reason.
The scaffolding we talked about?
Exactly. The rigorous isolation of variables, the separation of the material from the metaphysical in the immediate act of study, is not a mental fracture. It's the very scaffolding that allows the human mind to grasp the infinite complexity of the universe, one finite bracketed piece at a time.
So you think isolation is essential? Found framework, and one that deeply challenges our modern assumptions about exactly where secular education ends and sacred understanding begins.
It really does.
Whether you view the separation of sciences as a necessary cognitive tool or a tragic mental fracture, there is so much more to explore within this material regarding the relationship between empirical observation and ultimate truth.
Absolutely. The friction between analyzing the individual parts and synthesizing the grand whole is a conversation that will continually evolve as our scientific understanding grows.
Indeed. Think back to that chaotic symphony we started with. If we only ever listened to the isolated sound of a single violin, we might forget that we are sitting in a grand concert hall, surrounded by a masterpiece.
But to your point, we also might forget there is a composer.
Exactly. But as you rightly pointed out, if we don't first learn how to isolate that single instrument, we can never truly understand how the music is actually made.
It's a very delicate balance to strike.
It always is. Thank you for joining us on the debate.
Welcome to the deep dive. We have a really highly unique mission for you today.
Yeah, this one is definitely a bit off the beaten path for us.
Right. I mean, usually on this show, we take a massive stack of dense articles or, a controversial new book.
Or a giant piece of new research.
Exactly. And we try to extract the essential insights for you. But today we are doing something entirely different.
Completely different. We're getting incredibly granular.
We are. We are taking a magnifying glass and pointing it at a single, extremely specific digital artifact.
It's basically digital forensics at this point, to be honest.
That is the perfect way to describe it. So what you need to picture is a screenshot, just a sparse collection of text and standard user interface prompts.
Right, from a YouTube video.
Yes, from a single solitary video uploaded to a channel called Tedbiryay, and it features a speaker tagged as #Mustafa İslamoğlu.
And at first glance, it looks like any other random video metadata you'd scroll past without a second thought.
Totally. But the core artifact we are zeroing in on here is the naming structure of this specific video. It is so layered.
It's fascinating, really.
Because it's part of this intricate series. So it's labeled in Turkish, right? It says EH17 Esma-ul 9-1.
Right, and also Esma-ul Husna Dersleri 9-1 Esma-ul.
Which is, a very specific, highly coded, serialized Turkish title.
Extremely specific.
But then, sitting right next to those academic-looking codes, there's this sweeping English subtitle.
Yeah, and it just hits you out of nowhere.
It really does. The English subtitle is The Rights of Knowledge and the Pursuit of Divine Truth.
I mean, that is a massive philosophical statement.
It's huge.
Just sitting right there in the mundane metadata of a video platform.
And that ultimately is our goal for you today. We are going to explore the heavy philosophical weight of those specific words.
And then we're going to look at the friction.
Yes, the incredibly jarring friction between this grand ambition of pursuing, divine truth.
Right.
And the stark algorithmic reality of the digital environment that it actually lives in.
Because it's an environment defined by shuffle play buttons and low view counts.
Exactly. Error messages, shopping prompts. We're looking at how ancient traditions of knowledge basically crash headfirst into modern digital infrastructure.
It's quite a collision. And, the contrast is immediately apparent when you just look at how this video is categorized.
Let's break that down.
So you have this alphanumeric string, right? EH17,
right,
followed by 9-1. Then you have the Turkish descriptors, Esma-ul Husna Dersleri.
Okay, stop right there. I want to spend a second on Esma-ul Husna because we really need to understand what is actually being taught here.
It's true.
If we're going to figure out why it needs a title like EH17 9-1, what does that Turkish phrase actually mean?
Well, it signals that these are lessons on the beautiful names of God in Islamic theology.
Okay. And Esma-ul.
That marks it as an introduction. Girish means introduction.
Okay, but see, beautiful names of God sounds relatively straightforward, to a casual listener.
It does sound kind of simple on the surface.
Right. So why does it require what looks like a massive, multi-tiered academic curriculum?
Well, to really understand that, you have to look at the theological tradition it comes from.
Okay, let's dive into that.
In Islamic theology, the beautiful names, or the 99 names of Allah, aren't just like a list of vocabulary words you memorize in Sunday school.
Right, it's not just flashcards.
Exactly. They represent the ultimate attributes of the divine. So we're talking about mercy, justice, omnipotence, the creator, the sustainer.
Oh, wow. So it's heavy stuff.
Extremely heavy.
Oh.
Historically, scholars have spent entire lifetimes writing multi-volume exegeses on literally just one of those names.
Like on just one name.
Yeah. Just trying to unpack one single attribute.
It's mind-blowing.
Because it's about understanding how these attributes manifest in the universe, right? How they relate to human behavior.
Right, right.
And how they define the entire relationship between the creator and the created. It's considered the absolute pinnacle of theological study.
So it's not a quick weekend seminar on spirituality?
Not at all. It is a vast, interconnected web of epistemology and metaphysics.
Okay, well, that definitely contextualizes the code EH17 and 9-1. It's indicating an almost encyclopedic scale.
Precisely. And that word Dersleri, it explicitly labels it as a lesson or a lecture.
It's an academic term.
Yeah. And the code EH17 likely refers to the overarching series or, perhaps a specific year of a curriculum.
What's Biology 101?
Right, exactly. And then the 9-1 tells you exactly where you are in that specific sequence.
It's a map.
It is. It tells the viewer straight up that this is not a standalone piece of casual entertainment. It implies an ongoing, highly structured endeavor.
But I look at that, and I got to be honest, my immediate reaction is just pure intimidation.
Really? Intimidation?
Yeah. I mean, think about it for a second. If I am a casual learner, right, I'm just scrolling through YouTube on a Tuesday night.
Right, looking for something interesting.
Looking for a little spiritual inspiration, maybe. And I suddenly see Advanced Epistemology 401, Section 9, Part A.
You're probably not going to click on it.
I'm scrolling right past it. I haven't done the prerequisites. I haven't done the reading.
That's a very fair reaction.
Even if that English title promises something as universally appealing as The Pursuit of Divine Truth, the structure itself actively pushes me away.
It does create a barrier. Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of defeat the whole purpose of putting it on a massive public platform like YouTube?
Well, see, I wouldn't say it defeats the purpose, but it does create a very specific type of friction.
Friction, yeah.
Because you're looking at it through the lens of modern digital broadcasting, where the whole goal is to cast the widest net possible.
Right. The algorithm wants everyone to click, remove all the barriers to entry.
Exactly. But traditional theological education doesn't operate on a broadcast model.
What does it operate on then?
It operates on an initiation model.
An initiation model. Okay, explain that.
The complexity you're seeing. It isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature.
Oh, interesting.
It establishes authority, and more importantly, it requires a commitment from the student before they even begin.
So you're saying the intimidation factor is intentional? Like it's there to weed people out?
Well, it's less about actively weeding people out and more about setting the right expectations.
Setting the baseline.
Right. Think of it like walking into a university lecture hall mid-semester.
Yeah, you'd be totally lost.
If you jump into a lecture on the metaphysical implications of divine justice,
Right.
without having first understood the foundational concepts of divine mercy from the earlier lessons, you risk deeply misunderstanding the material.
You don't have the context to grasp what's being said.
Exactly. So that sequential code, 9-1, it's basically a warning label.
Proceed with caution.
It says, if you join us right now, you are walking into the middle of a very complex, ongoing conversation.
I see. It respects the integrity of the subject matter over the convenience of the viewer.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
I hear that, I really do. But then why include the English title at all?
The pursuit of divine truth part.
Yeah. The rights of knowledge and the pursuit of divine truth. The rest of the metadata is entirely in Turkish.
Sure.
The speaker, Mustafa İslamoğlu, is speaking Turkish in the video. The whole theological framework is rooted in Arabic and Turkish.
It's very localized in that sense.
So why offer this one grand philosophical life raft in English? To me, it feels like a contradiction.
I can see why you'd say that.
On one hand, you have this rigid, intimidating academic code keeping people out. And on the other hand, you have this incredibly broad, universal invitation in English.
It definitely seems contradictory at first glance, but I think it suggests a deep awareness of a dual audience.
A dual audience for the publisher.
Yes, for Tedbiryay, the alphanumeric codes and those Turkish titles, those are for the initiated.
The people already enrolled in this sort of digital seminary.
Exactly. They know what EH17 means.
Yeah.
They know exactly where they are in the syllabus. They're tracking it.
Okay, so who is the English title for?
The English title functions as a bridge to the global seeker.
Because English is basically the lingua franca of the internet.
Exactly. By appending that sweeping English title, the uploader is signaling something important.
What's the signal?
They're saying that the core themes discussed within this, 29-minute video transcend linguistic and cultural boundaries.
They're trying to elevate it.
Right. They are attempting to take a highly specific, localized lesson and connect it directly to a universal human philosophical concept.
It really forces you to consider how we interact with information based purely on its packaging, you know?
Absolutely. The packaging dictates our entire approach.
Because if this video was just titled The Pursuit of Divine Truth, with none of those intimidating academic codes,
it would have completely different expectations.
Exactly. I might click on it expecting a slick, polished, 10-minute TED Talk style summary.
With high production value and easy takeaways.
Right. But because it has both the grand title and the codes, you are immediately faced with a different reality.
You realize that pursuing divine truth actually requires sitting through lesson 9-1 of series 17.
Which demands a massive adjustment of expectations on the part of the viewer.
It demands patience. And honestly, that leads us directly into the specific phrasing of that English title.
Let's get into it, because this is my favorite part.
It is perhaps the most fascinating piece of this entire artifact, the first half of that title.
The rights of knowledge.
Yes.
I want to spend some serious time dissecting that exact phrase, because the syntax is, well, it's really unusual for an English speaker.
It is. It's not how we typically frame things.
Usually, when we talk about knowledge in a modern societal context, we frame it from the human perspective.
Right. The human is the focal point.
We talk about a human's right to knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, the right to education, freedom of information.
Open source learning, all of that.
Exactly. This idea that knowledge is a public good, like water or air, that everyone is inherently entitled to.
We center the human as the active receiver, and knowledge is the passive commodity.
Right. Knowledge is just stuff we're allowed to go get.
But the phrasing, the rights of knowledge, completely inverts that power dynamic.
It flips it on its head.
Entirely. By using the preposition of, knowledge is no longer a passive object waiting on a shelf to be consumed.
It's almost anthropomorphized.
Yes. It is treated as an independent entity, an entity that possesses inherent rights of its own.
Which is wild to think about.
It suggests that knowledge itself makes demands of the person seeking it.
Okay, I struggle with this concept a bit. I'll play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
It sounds inherently elitist to say that knowledge has rights.
Elitist how?
Well, Doesn't the entire history of human progress, from the Gutenberg printing press to Wikipedia, prove that information wants to be free?
That's the Silicon Valley mantra, certainly.
Right. Why should I, as a human being, have an obligation to a piece of data? If I find a YouTube video, I can watch it at 2x speed.
You can skip around, Charles.
I can close it after 30 seconds if I'm bored. I am the user. I own the experience.
But you are conflating information with knowledge. And in this tradition, they are emphatically not the same thing.
Okay, break that distinction down for me. Information versus knowledge.
Information is just data. It's raw, it's neutral, and it is abundant.
Like the population of a country or the boiling point of water.
Exactly. Yes, information wants to be free. You can skim a Wikipedia article or watch a 30-second TikTok summary and extract information.
And in that scenario, I hold all the power.
You hold all the power. But knowledge, especially the kind of profound theological or philosophical knowledge implied by the pursuit of divine truth, that's different.
How so?
It requires integration. It requires a fundamental transformation of the learner.
So it's not just acquiring facts, it's changing who you are.
Right. So if knowledge has rights, what it demands is that you engage with it on its terms, not yours.
Okay, let's explore that practically. If I accept this premise that knowledge actually has rights, what are my obligations as the student? What do I owe it?
Historically, within these rigorous intellectual traditions, your first obligation to knowledge is respect for its accuracy and its original context.
Meaning I can't just twist it to mean whatever I want.
Exactly. You cannot distort it, you can't cherry-pick quotes out of context, and you certainly can't weaponize it to fit your pre-existing biases.
Because to do so would be to violate the rights of that knowledge.
Yeah, precisely. You owe it the effort of accurate, honest comprehension.
So it demands active, rigorous study rather than just passive consumption.
Yes, and a second obligation would be proper application.
Application, like how I use it in the world.
Right. If you acquire profound knowledge, you're now ethically bound by it. You cannot possess wisdom and then act recklessly.
So knowledge in this framework actually carries a moral weight.
It is not a neutral tool. It's a responsibility.
Wow.
And a third, highly relevant obligation here is the necessity of sequential understanding.
Which brings us right back to the code 9-1.
Exactly. You owe it to the complex ideas to build a proper foundation before attempting to grasp the pinnacle concepts.
So the video's title is literally telling us, I demand that you understand lessons 1 through 8 before you try to process me.
Yes, it's setting a boundary.
You know, this entire concept is just deeply, fundamentally antithetical to modern digital culture.
Oh, it's from a completely different universe.
We live in an era of massive info snacking.
Info snacking, yes.
We treat the internet like an infinite buffet. You scroll through a feed, you read a sensational headline.
You watch a 15-second reel.
Right, and you walk away feeling informed. We just digest whatever tiny dopamine-inducing nutrient is in there.
And then immediately discard the rest to move on to the next snack.
Exactly. The phrase, the rights of knowledge, is a direct, almost hostile critique of that entire ecosystem.
Because when you are info snacking, you are the master of the data.
You are.
You control the scroll, you control the pace, you dismiss profound ideas with a literal flick of your thumb.
But if you acknowledge the rights of knowledge,
then you must humble yourself. You become the servant of the inquiry.
You're no longer a consumer.
No, you are a steward.
A steward, I like that word. A consumer uses something up until it's gone. A steward protects something, cultivates it,
and ensures it remains intact for the next person.
And the word Durslari lessons, that implies a relationship, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A relationship between the teacher, the student, and the material itself. It's a transfer of responsibility.
Man. And this brings us to what I think is the ultimate friction we wanted to talk about today.
The clash of environments.
Right. We have established this incredibly lofty, ancient, rigorous framework for seeking truth.
A framework demanding humility, sequence, and ethical responsibility.
Yes, and we are taking the sacred framework and dropping it straight into the middle of the YouTube user interface.
It's almost comical when you step back and look at it.
The collision between those two worlds is frankly absurd. Let's look at the second half of that English title again.
The pursuit of divine truth.
This is the highest possible stakes for any intellectual endeavor in human history.
It doesn't get higher.
We aren't talking about a tutorial on how to fix a leaky faucet or a makeup review. We are talking about the nature of ultimate transcendent reality.
Right.
And yet our source text reveals the digital realities surrounding this pursuit.
And the architecture of that digital environment is entirely indifferent to the sacredness of the content it hosts.
Indifferent is the perfect word. The source material captures the specific user interface surrounding this video.
What do we see there?
Well, you have this 29-minute and 37-second pursuit of divine truth.
A very specific duration.
And floating right on top of it, baked into the player, are the standard platform prompts.
Like tap to unmute?
Right. Tap to unmute the divine truth. The option to watch it at 2x speed because, we're in a hurry to reach enlightenment.
Can't spend a whole 29 minutes on the nature of God.
Exactly. And my absolute favorite detail from the source, right next to the video, the platform is suggesting you look at shopping.
The juxtaposition is just staggering. The eternal sitting right next to the algorithmic.
It is so jarring. How are you supposed to genuinely engage with the rights of knowledge when the interface is simultaneously asking if you want to buy a pair of noise-canceling headphones?
You really can't. And this highlights a fundamental truth about how platforms like YouTube actually operate.
Which is what?
The infrastructure is a completely flattened hierarchy.
Flattened meaning everything is equal.
Exactly. The servers and the code that host a compilation of teenagers falling off skateboards are the exact same servers and code that host a theological discourse on the attributes of God.
The platform doesn't know the difference.
The platform does not possess the capacity to distinguish between the profound and the profane.
Its only metric of value is engagement.
Just numbers. Time on site.
Well, let's dig into that engagement metric then, because the source material provides the view counts for this specific artifact, and it's quite revealing.
Yes, the metadata shows conflicting numbers, doesn't it?
It does. In one area, like a playlist preview, it literally says no views.
0.
But in another spot on the video itself, it says 3 views. And the upload date is listed as 10 months ago.
10 months. 3 views.
When you see those numbers, 3 views in almost a year, what does it actually tell us about how the platform functions?
Well, what's your first instinct when you hear those numbers?
My first instinct, and I think most people's, is to think, well, the content just must not be very engaging. If it was good, people would watch it.
And that is a very common cognitive bias that has been entirely shaped by the platforms themselves.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have been trained over the last 15 years to conflate visibility with value.
Ah, I see what you mean.
If something has 5 million views, our brain subconsciously assumes it has high intrinsic value, or at least cultural importance.
Because so many people validated it.
Exactly. If a piece of media has 3 views, we instinctively assume it is irrelevant, boring, or low quality.
But you're saying that assumption is flawed.
It fundamentally misunderstands how algorithmic discovery actually works.
Okay, so how does the algorithm actually process a video titled EH17 as my girish 9-to-1? Why does it bury it so completely?
Recommendation algorithms are essentially highly complex neural networks, right? And they are optimizing for one primary goal.
Keeping you on the site?
Yes, maximizing user session time so they can serve more advertisements. That's the business model.
Simple enough.
To do that, the algorithm looks for specific signals from the users. It looks at the click-through rate, the CTR.
Meaning how many people click the video when they see the thumbnail on their homepage.
Exactly. It also looks at audience retention. Do people watch the whole thing, or do they click away after 10 seconds?
Right.
And it looks for broad appeal and emotional resonance.
Yeah.
It heavily favors content that triggers immediate curiosity, outrage, or amusement.
So it's looking for a dopamine hit. It wants to hook you instantly.
Exactly. Now, apply those specific platform metrics to our artifact.
Okay.
The title is heavily coded, it's in multiple languages, it's deeply intimidating.
EH17 9-to-1. Not very clicky.
Not at all. The topic, a sequential lesson on Islamic theology, requires immense prior context and deep, sustained concentration.
Right.
So if the algorithm experimentally shows this thumbnail to 100 random people,
maybe one person clicks it out of sheer confusion.
maybe one. And of that one person, they open it, they realize it's a 30-minute academic lecture in Turkish, and they click away after 20 seconds.
Because they weren't prepared for it.
Right. So what does the algorithm learn from that interaction?
That the video is a dud.
Exactly. The machine learning models immediately categorize the video as low engagement, low value.
And it just drops it.
It stops recommending it entirely. It pushes it down in search results.
Wow.
The algorithm doesn't know, and doesn't care that the video contains a genuine pursuit of divine truth.
It only cares that it failed to generate a high click-through rate.
Precisely.
It's essentially marooning this knowledge on a digital desert island.
That's exactly what's happening.
It exists on the single largest broadcasting platform in the history of human civilization, and yet it is entirely invisible.
It really highlights the vast, vast ocean of niche, deep dive content that exists entirely outside the viral economy.
Stuff we never even see.
Never. There are thousands of hours of rigorous, profound academic and theological work sitting on these servers.
Just gathering digital dust.
Effectively walled off. Not by government censorship, but by sheer algorithmic indifference.
Because the platform optimizes for the lowest common denominator of immediate engagement.
And the rights of knowledge optimize for the exact opposite.
It's a tragic mismatch. And there is a specific UI feature mentioned in the source material that just perfectly encapsulates this friction for me.
Oh, which one?
Right in the middle of the playlist options, underneath the video, there is a prompt for shuffle play.
Oh, yes. The idea of putting a sequential theological curriculum on shuffle is just fascinating.
Think about the mechanics of that. You have a video explicitly labeled 9-1.
It has a designated place in line.
Yes. It belongs to a numbered sequential curriculum. It demands a linear progression to build these complex foundational concepts.
You need lesson 8 before lesson 9.
Exactly. And the platform's native interface offers you a button to completely randomize the experience.
Mix it up.
Right. It treats Esma-ul Husna the exact same way it treats a Spotify playlist of 90s pop hits.
It is an active invitation from the platform to violate the rights of the knowledge being presented.
That is such a profound way to look at it.
Because if the subject matter demands discipline, sequence, and foundational understanding,
which we established it does.
Right. The shuffle play button argues for convenience, variety, and nonlinear consumption.
It's saying, don't work too hard, just enjoy the vibes.
It suggests that context simply doesn't matter, that you could just drop it at lesson 14, bounce back to lesson 3, skip to lesson 9.
And somehow still achieve enlightenment.
Exactly. It's an illusion of learning.
It's imposing the medium's behavior onto content that actively resists it. It's like picking up a 1,000-page physics textbook and having a robot continually offer to scramble the pages for you so you don't get bored.
That's a great analogy. The user interface is not a neutral window. It carries an ideology.
An ideology of consumption.
Yes. The button itself makes a philosophical argument about how we should consume the world.
And that argument is entirely focused on user autonomy and frictionless experience.
The platform wants you to remain in motion. It wants you to keep clicking, keep shuffling, keep moving to the next piece of content.
Never settle.
But the pursuit of divine truth requires you to stop.
It requires stillness.
To sit still for 29 minutes and 37 seconds and submit to the structure of the lesson.
And if you don't, well, we also see the platform actively failing mechanically in our source material.
The error message.
Yes, there is a literal error message captured in the metadata. It reads, "An error occurred while retrieving sharing information. Please try again later."
It almost reads like dark comedy.
It really does. You are attempting to share the pursuit of divine truth with the world, and the digital infrastructure throws up a 404 error.
Sorry, we cannot retrieve the sharing information for ultimate reality.
Try again later.
But beyond the irony, it serves as a rather poignant metaphor, doesn't it?
For what?
For the sheer difficulty of communicating complex, profound ideas in a fragmented digital landscape.
It's an uphill battle.
Think about the creator, Tedbiryay. They go through the immense effort of recording this highly academic lecture.
They meticulously title it.
They append this sweeping English translation specifically to reach a broader audience.
They upload it to the global servers.
And the result of all that labor, 3 views in 10 months, and a broken mechanism for sharing it.
It's heartbreaking in a way. It really makes you wonder about the motivation of the uploader.
Why keep doing it?
Yeah. If the platform suppresses the content, if the audience clearly isn't there, why continue to upload lesson after lesson of a massive theological curriculum?
I think it is an act of pure digital faith.
Digital faith, I like that.
They're not uploading it for the algorithm. They know the algorithm won't reward them.
So who are they uploading it for?
They are uploading it for the archive.
Ah.
It is the modern equivalent of a monk transcribing a manuscript in an isolated monastery on a mountain.
Just preserving the knowledge.
Exactly. They are putting the message in a bottle and throwing it into an ocean of exabytes.
Trusting that it will land somewhere.
Trusting that eventually someone, somewhere, will have the prerequisite knowledge, the patience, and the profound desire to hit play on lesson 9 to 1.
And actually listen to it.
Right. They are fulfilling their obligation to the rights of the knowledge by simply ensuring it is available.
Regardless of whether the platform rewards them with views or likes or revenue.
Exactly. The availability is the point.
Wow. So, as we look back at the entirety of this deep dive, it is amazing how much weight is packed into a single mundane screenshot of YouTube metadata.
It really is a microcosm of a much larger cultural shift.
We started with what looked like a confusing string of letters and numbers. EH17 Esma-ul Girish 9 to 1.
And we unpacked it as an entry point into a massive ancient theological curriculum.
We explored the philosophical weight of granting rights to knowledge,
contrasting the rigorous demands of traditional study with our modern culture of passive info snacking.
We observed the profound structural clash between the high-stakes pursuit of ultimate truth
and the sterile, indifferent mechanics of the digital platform hosting it.
The algorithms that favor a quick dopamine hit over real depth.
And the user interfaces that offer to shuffle a rigid curriculum while simultaneously prompting you to go shopping.
It's wild. We are living in a time where we have unprecedented access to the most profound thoughts in human history.
More access than any generation before us.
But they are delivered to us through machinery designed explicitly for distraction.
That is the great paradox of our era.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought that I want to leave you with today.
Oh, there's more.
Yes, there is one last piece of user interface text found in our source material that we actually haven't discussed yet.
What is it?
It is perhaps the most universally relatable and arguably the most deceptive button on the entire internet.
I think I know where you're going with this.
The button that simply says, watch later.
The deferral button.
Exactly. I want you to consider your own digital habits for a second. Think about when you are scrolling through a feed.
We all do it.
And you come across something that signals it is profound, complex, and demanding.
A 2-hour documentary, a university lecture.
Or a deep dive that requires 30 or 60 minutes of your undivided, rigorous attention. What is your instinctive reaction?
Do you stop the scroll?
Right. Do you submit to the demands of that knowledge in that exact moment?
For most of us, let's be honest, the answer is no.
We feel a twinge of aspirational guilt, don't we?
We do. We recognize the inherent value of the material.
We know it's good for us.
But we are completely unwilling to pay the toll of attention required right then and there.
So we take the easy out, we click watch later.
And we tell ourselves a little story to feel better about it.
We say, I will get to this when I have more time.
When I am in the right headspace.
When I am ready to sit down with a hot cup of coffee, a notebook, and truly engage.
But we rarely do.
We save the idea of the knowledge. We save the potential of the enlightenment.
Rather than engaging with the knowledge itself.
And by doing so, we pacify that intellectual guilt without actually doing the work.
We check the box without taking the class.
Exactly. So I want you to think about your own watch later playlist right now.
That's a dangerous place to look.
If you were to open it up, what would you find in there?
Just a graveyard of good intentions.
How many brilliant lectures, how many deep dives into history, science, or philosophy are sitting there, just gathering digital dust?
How many videos are languishing with 3 views, waiting for you to finally make the time?
It really is the hoarding of potential wisdom.
That's exactly what it is.
The knowledge is sitting there, meticulously categorized, coded as 9 to 1, practically begging to be understood.
It is waiting for you to respect its rights.
The only question is whether you will ever actually press play, or if you will just leave the pursuit of truth for later.
A question we all have to answer every single time we log on.
Until next time, keep digging into those digital depths.